Hi, everyone, and we're back for another episode of Wedgie Talk. I'm your host, Hans Gutherson, here to talk with some of the coolest creators in the community about writing, their fetish, art, and everything else we can come up with. I have a very special guest with me here today, a very talented writer and artist, someone who's racked up more than 250 watchers, more than 37,000 page views, someone who's dazzled us with art and stories, who's also been a guest on one of our writers panels, my friend Sorry12. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sorry.
And thank you for having me here.
Yeah, it's so great to have you on. The first question I always sort of start with, just to sort of dive into it, is about the name, your username, Sorry12. I'd love to just sort of hear, why did you pick that name?
Oh man, it's weird because I've had that name for such a long time that let me think. Like when I first made it, I was like on DA, but I hadn't made a username yet, and I was like, okay, let me sit down, let me finally make an account so I can start like saving things in my favorites. And I was like, and like the first thing that popped in my mind was just sorry, and I was like, I'll use that, and then I'll tack on a 12 because it's 2012, and now it's just like stuck with me so much that like I don't want to change it.
Nice. That's very cool. And it fits, it sounds like. So from that 2012, you sort of got on DA. Let's wind the clock back a bit and sort of, if you're cool with that, I'd love to sort of hear about how you realized you maybe had the fetish, how that developed for you, and really start from that beginning.
Oh man, I think it started. It was like before 2012. I know I was a kid, and I probably like got one from like one of my older brothers, and I was like, wow, like what? Like, I didn't even know like what it was before, so I started looking it up, and then before I knew, I kind of just like fell down the rabbit hole on YouTube and stuff. Like I look up videos and all of that, and then I think from there I like somehow stumbled across DeviantArt, and I was like, after that, like I was kind of just like I just got really into it.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I think something a lot of people share, which is very interesting for sure. So from that, sounds like you're on DA for a bit, reading before you sort of join and you start an account in 2012. So then from there, why did you sort of begin getting into writing and then later art? What was that process like from going from a sort of viewer to creator?
Let me think. So I for writing, basically, I love to write. I used to write. Like I've been writing for fun probably since sometime in like early middle school, maybe or like fourth grade. And I joined the community, and I was just lurking a lot. And then it was like I think my first story went up in 2015. So I was like I just lurked for 3 years with an account, and I was finally decided that I should like give back to the community in some way. So I started writing stories, and then I just kept writing. I didn't really post super frequently, and then at one point I decided that it would be cool to try and capture my characters by drawing them. Because like I would draw, and I thought that it would be really fun. And then before I knew it, like I just started drawing all the time. Like it's kind of gotten out of control.
I like that though, continuing to do it over such a period. And with that, I'm curious. To me, drawing has always seemed like such a crazy thing to do. I can't even imagine sort of creating art in the way like you do and a lot of really good artists do. So I'm curious, can you sort of tell me about your art process? You mentioned bringing your characters to sort of life in that way. But how does that sort of work with you when you're drawing? What does that look like?
Okay, so basically my process is I first I'll think of how I want the character to look like after I've like established their personality and like what they do, their likes and dislikes and all of that. And then I use this program called Metabank Paint, which Sandstorm 15 recommended to me. And I like the first thing I do is I start with a circle, and then I draw like guidelines for the face, and then I just do like the chin, the ear, or ears, and I do like the hair, the face, and then I do like an outline for the body, like a really rough outline that's literally just like a line for the neck, and then like two trapezoids for the upper for like the upper body and like the beginnings of the lower body.
Mhm.
And I just do like lines for the arms and the legs.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's just a lot of trying to get the just trying to get the line out to look right before I go into coloring and shading. So it's very tedious, especially because I don't have a drawing tablet. I use a computer mouse, so it can take
Mhm.
like all day sometimes.
That must be difficult. Yeah, to not be able to sort of just draw it down, having to work with a mouse. That sounds like a challenge.
Yeah.
So, with that, just in terms of sort of making art as well, are there other challenges in sort of turning your characters into art? If you have a vision of them, is it maybe difficult to sort of translate that to art, or are there other challenges that come with being an artist as well?
Oh, definitely. Like I know when I was drawing Phoebe for the first time, I didn't know how I wanted her hair to look like. So because I was like, okay, she's a blonde and she has short hair, but I couldn't actually like figure out a nice looking short hairstyle for her. So I eventually got one, but then like I started drawing more and more, and then I was like, okay, my style's changed a lot. Let me try and redraw her, and then I realized that I had no idea like how to, because like my art style changed a lot from when I first
Mhm.
started. So I was like, okay, how do I even get her to look similar to how she was before, but like in an updated style? So I actually ended up putting it off for like a couple of months, I think. And then other than that, I would say the hardest thing to draw is like the actual like getting the underwear stretched is actually very difficult. They're very hard to draw, which is
Yeah.
why I usually avoid it.
That's very interesting detail and one super relevant, I think, for artists in our community, which is
Yeah.
funny for sure. I'm curious though. You mentioned your art style changing. How would you say it's changed, and when did this sort of change happen for you?
Let's see. It kind when I first started drawing, I kind of went for this thing where like they didn't have the sclera in their eyes; it was just like a solid color. And then from there, I was drawing and then I drew Daria, and I was like, okay, let me mix things up, give her like an iris, give her the sclera and all of that. And then I just kept experimenting, and I would look at artists who like inspire me in and outside of the community, and I would try and learn from them. If I could, I'd ask people for tips, and then over time, you kind of just like it's kind of like when you're writing, and as you keep writing, you think to yourself, oh, maybe I should like instead of writing this long sentence with commas, I'll split it up with periods, and then
Mhm.
like change my style in that way. So it's just like you either read stories and then you improve your reading like your writing like that, or you can look at other artists and then try new things.
That's
That
awesome.
makes sense.
No, it does, and that's super cool advice in general. Are there any examples of artists, since we're just talking about art right now, that have inspired you and sort of helped maybe develop your style a bit?
Oh man, let's see. For people in the community, it's been Samstorm 15, Omni Shinobi, Demon Angel Theo, who else? Uh, Raptor, Sesota, Arch and Gemin, like basically like all the big names, like all like
Sure.
the big artists in the community have inspired me in one way or another. Then outside of the community, I was inspired by One Piece a lot
Mm.
because I love to read it. So I tried to, or at least tried to emulate it a little bit.
Nice. That's super cool to be able to point to those. One Piece still something I gotta get into. You and I will have
Oh,
to have a binging session after this at some point. You tell me where to
that'd
start,
be awesome.
although it's so long. But
Hmm.
beyond me fanboying on some of that, because I can see some of that in your work when I think about it now, and I hadn't caught that before. Um,
Hmm.
but sort of pivoting away from that, one thing I was really curious about, for those who don't know some of your stories like Blythe's Beginning, your super popular Speed Queen series, for example, one thing I
Hmm.
noticed going over a lot of your work is there seems to be elements of fantasy and sort of magic and the supernatural elements in it. And I want to sort of dig into that a bit, and sort of ask why that was, why it seemed you gravitated to that in a lot of the work you do.
Oh man, for that I would say just because I'm really bad at writing like realistic fiction. Like back in school, anytime I had to write like if it was like an English class and they said, okay, do a realistic fiction story, it would just always be a struggle for me. Like I could only ever do creative writing. And because of that, like I would always write fantasy stories or like sci-fi things. And then that ended up influencing my writing on the website a lot on DA because it's just like, I just tell myself, oh, it'd be cool to have like a speedster OC or like someone who's a vampire, for example. And look, it's just really fun to like throw them into situations that can only come from them being special.
I like that. Yeah, I like the idea of them being special, which is interesting. And I guess you mentioned sort of always having an interesting in reading and writing. Was that always something you sort of gravitated towards? The sort of the unusualness of it, the really sort of specialness that comes from something like sci-fi and fantasy?
Yeah, yeah, because like for me, it's just like a really nice way to just like it's like a nice form of escapism where you can just kind of sit back and you can write something and you're like, wow, this world is just like amazing. Like just thinking about that, and it just feels fun to like mess around and like imagine how a world would be like if there was a girl who got super speed one day.
And lots of wedgies
Oh, of
afterwards. Oh,
course.
but no, that's super cool. That's really cool. So from that, I'd love to sort of dive into your writing as well and some of your work. Do you have a favorite of the work you've done? Some work you think people should check out if they haven't, if they aren't super familiar with your work?
Let's see. If they're not super familiar, I would recommend anything in my news stories gallery or the Speed Queen gallery. Don't bother looking at the old stuff. That stuff is not as good as I would like it to be. I would recommend maybe Fascio di Catone. That was a good one. That one's really long though. It's like 6K words. So if you want to just sit down and read, then I'd recommend that one. And then if you want something that's just like, because that one is just really out there. Because I was like, okay, let me combine like what I love about that was kind of just like let me combine wedgies with like a fascist society that's just really it was just really funny to write.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, I'd recommend the Speed Queen series because that one's just like really. I think it's fun to read because it's just like wacky. And it's hilarious. I'll probably get back to working on it soon too, so that's also good.
That's always exciting when we know new content's
Yep.
coming for sure. So from that as well, I sort of gave my look at some of your content, seeing some of that, the escapism, the sort of supernatural, the really cool superpowers. Are there any sort of characteristics that you think define your work, or sort of a style you maybe have that maybe sets you apart from other writers in the community?
Outside of just really out there ideas, it's kind of weird because like my style apparently changed again because I used to kind of write like I'd put dialogue and then I would have like a blob of text right after that, and then after the contest that the Unwashed Marxist had, I got some feedback, and then I went back and I changed my style. I tried to like I would split up the text more, and then I stopped the writing for a while because I was doing a lot of drawing, and then I came back to writing, and then he told me he's like your style changed again, and I was like I haven't like, done much. Like I guess I've been paying attention more to like how people write in the community, and I've also been trying to like cut down my sentence sizes because I tend to throw in commas and then the sentence ends up being way too long.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just feel like my style just changes too much for me to like even like get a good grasp on it.
But in a way, that could be interesting for you, right? Because you get to try out so many different things potentially, which could be interesting. So from that too, I'm curious. You mentioned artists who've really sort of inspired you. Are there some writers you sort of look to in the community, or outside of it, to sort of inform your writing at all?
Oh man. Well, of course, there's you for one. Who else? I like reading your stories. I like reading The Unwashed the Marxist. I read I read Rook, JCCW, of course, with his Hannah and Sarah series, which anyone who's listening to this should go and read because it's very good.
Nice.
Give him some promotion there.
Yeah.
Shadow Melder's awesome. Like a lot of the classic authors like Sesta or Amy stories now. And there's like some of the writers who haven't been around for a while, but like haven't written anything in a while, but like I'll still go back and read their stories. Like there's Winter Wedge, Honey on Rye, Critical Zenogre. Like there's a lot of like I just love reading like a lot of the stories that I get to see.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this might be a tough question then, because it sounds like you're super well read. But do you have like a favorite story? When you think like, oh man, this is the best, everyone should read this.
Oh, so that is a hard question. It's like, let me think. I don't even know if I have a favorite story. Like,
okay.
Like, man, that's a really hard question.
We can always come back to it too. I'll give you a chance to think on that. One thing I wanted to sort of pivot a little bit with this question. So many, like the vast majority, according to sort of the polls I've done and others have done, like Arc Time, vast majority of people in the community are sort of white males. So I was curious at all if you think your race maybe had any impact on your writing or the art you do, in any way. It might be an out there question, but for everyone I've talked to on the podcast has been white so far, except for Shadow Melder. So I was sort of curious. I think off the top of my head. So I wasn't sure if maybe you feel like that might have had some impact on your art in any way.
When I think about it, it's like, let me think. It's kind of like I don't think it's impacted me too much, just because like at least when it comes to art, I read a lot of manga, for example. So I like to emulate like that style. It's just like I could try to emulate that style. And for me, at least, my race has never really been like a big thing to me.
Sure.
So I've kind of always been like, yeah, I'm sorry, 12. That's me.
Yeah, I like that, and I guess a big part of it too that I hadn't thought was being online. That really never factors in, right? We are just usernames, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And I guess sort of to that, I guess it hasn't had a big impact on just sort of being a part of the community, right? Like even though we see some stats that like there's a lot of white people, I guess that doesn't really matter in the everyday thing, right? Because it's not really something that ever comes up, I think, when in the community, as far as I know.
Yeah, same. Yeah, as far as I know, I never really heard anything about that, really.
Okay. Yeah, no, it was just something I was sort of curious about, if that had some impact. Good to hear that, as sort of we could expect that it's really not come up, which is a positive, I think. In some ways, it's really just about the art, like you mentioned, which is, I think, the best part of that.
Yeah.
So sort of bringing it back to a more, I guess, wedgie-focused angle, I'm just sort of curious about plans for future content you might have. You mentioned getting back to Speed Queen, which is super exciting. But is there anything else you can sort of tell us about? Give us some teases about future wedgies we might be expecting from you?
So this one, when did I come up with it? I was watching this anime, and then it was like a harem series, and I finished it, and I was like, you know what? I've never seen like a harem series before that's focused on wedgies. So like, let me try and make one. And I just spent like I got the idea down. I got like a really rough plot for like the first chapter, and then after that, I just started going through like a list of different tropes and like character archetypes and things like that. And then I started what I do. I like, made a plan where I was like, okay, I'm going to like I'm gonna have there be like 5 different girls. Each of them is gonna have two traits, and then like I just started making all these like different things I could calculate. I could give them using like a random number generator. So there's like their social skill where it's like, oh, if they roll a 1, then they're considered an outcast. If they roll a 5, they're like the life of the party. Everyone on campus knows their name.
Yeah.
It's gonna take place in like a college setting. So once I can figure out the name, like I have their characteristics down. I just need to decide on like a main character, names for everyone, and then plot out like enough scenarios to give me an actual series.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that'll be really awesome.
That sounds super cool. Like a really unique concept for sure. And sort of beyond that, and that already sounds like a big undertaking, but are there other projects, even maybe dreams of things, big things you maybe thought like that'd be so cool if I could pull off that you'd maybe love to tackle one day?
Oh yeah, I did mention that. When did what did I mention it? I think it was yeah, I mentioned it before where I wanted to do like I wanted to make like an interactive story.
Mm-hmm.
But like depending on your choices, you'd end up being like the more dominant partner in a relationship, or the receiver in the relationship. And like I got the idea down, and then I was working on it, and then I realized like, okay, if I do this, I have to come up with like multiple good and bad endings for both paths, and that's like it'd be like a lot of work, like even more than trying to make a harem series. It would just be like thinking about that many endings, that many different possibilities and branching storylines would basically be like the hardest thing I could ever do to myself.
Are you someone though who's maybe like excited by that sort of challenge? Like, do you still think that's something you'd want to tackle, or when you begin thinking something's that hard, you sort of say, "Oh, maybe not for me."
For me, I would say that like I see that it's like that hard, and then I tell myself, okay, you have 2 options. You can either forget it ever happened and then keep mentioning it as if you're going to do it one day,
Nice.
or you can just like tackle it a little bit at a time, like just like instead of trying to overwhelm yourself with all the different possibilities, you focus on one part of the story, get that finished, focus on the next part of the story, get that finished next, and just like kind of method, just kind of like take like a really methodological. I don't even know how to say the word. But
Yeah.
just like take like a really diligent and like structured approach to it until I could get it done.
I like that. I like that. So can we potentially expect you to take that second approach and sort of grind away at it at some point in the future?
I do think so. Yeah.
Nice. That's exciting. That's exciting, my friend. That sounds super cool. Like you have very ambitious ideas, which I love, but that gives us a lot to
Thank
look
you.
forward to, which is really cool. And sort of stepping back from that, we dove into your art process in some particulars, but I didn't ask about sort of what it looks like when it comes to writing. Are you someone who outlines a lot, or so can you sort of walk me through what that looks like for you when you're writing stories?
Yeah. So when I originally used to write, my process would be come up with an idea and then write a story. Don't even check for typos or spelling errors or anything. Just post it online and then move on to the next thing. And then I like matured and I realized, okay, you should actually proofread your work because like I think on my first story it mentions like 10 pairs of hands or something diving into her pants instead of 10 fingers.
Okay.
And I didn't even remember it until until someone read it, and then someone read it recently, and they told me they're like, it says 10 pairs of hands. I was like,
It's a
wow.
lot of hands. Nice.
Yep.
That's big. I love it.
hmm
Okay.
So now I've changed a lot. So my process is, I'll come up with an idea, I'll come up with the characters, I'll make like a really rough idea for the plot, and then I'll basically start just like focus on the plot, make sure everything can. I'll decide, okay, so this is how the story's gonna look, and then I'll actually get to writing it.
Hmm.
I've been trying to focus more on plotting before I write, but I still like the thrill of just diving into a story and then seeing where it takes me.
Nice. That's a really cool approach for sure. And when would you say you sort of started to change or see that sort of maturing, I guess, if that's the right word, and focusing more on editing and stuff?
Oh man, I would say it was probably around, looking at like a rough day, not a rough date, just like a rough story. It was probably when I swapped to my new story gallery, which is when I think that's when I started going back and editing more. That was like 2018. Wow.
Okay. Okay. So
Wow.
you joined DA 2012, and were you writing in 2012 at that point?
Oh, oh no, I didn't start writing until 2015.
2015, that's right. Yeah. And then 2018, you take a different approach to it. So super cool. So you've been writing for quite a while now as
Oh
well,
yeah.
too. Are there any sort of beyond sort of looking at writing a bit more carefully, as you mentioned, or a lot more carefully, and maybe not always diving into the stories? Are there any sort of big changes too, in maybe the stories you want to tell, or the themes or topics you're maybe tackling in your stories?
Big changes. I guess one of the most obvious changes would be like the setting change. Because like when I first started, it was a lot of high school stuff. Because like that's like the really popular, really common thing to do. And then
Sure.
I got older. I'm in college, and I was like, okay, let me like. I was just like, college feels just like so much more free. Like you can write more scenarios where, because like if they're limited to high school, then like they can only get like the bully or whoever's going after them, the giver, can only really get them in school, like on school grounds, locker room, bathroom, hallway, cafeteria, flagpole, all those things. Like if you're in
Yeah.
college, it's like, oh, what if they're like I think I maybe did this like in one story, but it's like, oh, what if your giver is your roommate, or like,
Hmm.
or maybe what if the giver is like your resident advisor, or like your resident counselor, or something like the upperclassman on your floor. Like, what if they
Yeah.
were the one who was giving them to you, or just like, like when it's in a college, it's like the characters are like always there, so there's always the different things that can happen to them.
Nice. That's a really cool shift. It sounds like really opening up your work to different opportunities, which I guess that maybe helps when you're writing about some very unique and sort of supernatural scenarios in some ways too, being able to keep things so open. Sounds like it could
Yeah,
be a good fit,
because
potentially.
like in my most recent story, like it was the Halloween story I did with Phoebe and them, and that one they were having like a big Halloween festival at their college, basically. So like it gave me a good excuse for like, oh, this is why she's going out of her room. This is why she's with her friends. This is why her usual like bully and her friends, like her teammates, ganged up on them. So good. So like just having that scenarios made it like really easy to write.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been throwing out some of the names of your stories and OCs. I was curious if you wanted to sort of give people a breakdown of some of the biggest characters in the sort of Sorry12 universe. If you want to sort of tell us a bit more about them and maybe why they stand out, you think, from maybe other OCs out there.
Oh man, let's see. There is, who is it? I would say like the first time I made like a character I really enjoyed was probably when I did Daisy and Jenna, which was a long time ago. That was also 2018. Oh man!
Nice.
But basically, it was just like this relationship between like the shorter girl who's like always really energetic, and she likes receiving, and she has her taller friend who's like a soccer star, and one day she's at, Jenna's at Daisy's house. She gets her, and then she realizes, oh, she likes this, and then like I just kind of left it like I indicated like, oh yeah, they kind of like get together in the end, and it wasn't until like for a long time like I don't think I ever touched them again, and then another writer reached out to me and they were like, I think it was EHP32, and they're like, I really like loved those characters. Like, dude, would you mind if we collab sometime? And I was like, oh sure. And so like after that, we did like some writing together, which was really awesome. So I feel like those are like my first impactful characters, and it wasn't until maybe Speed Queen, which is like you have your average girl who gets super speed.
Mm-hmm.
You have her roommate who's like a genius who's basically already has her degrees, but and like works at the school in a way, but still wants like that college experience. There's her like Scottish international student friend who's a witch, which I should like get around to drawing her friends because I feel like no one really knows. Like I've described them before, but like I should actually get around to like. I feel like they'd be more impactful characters if they had like an illustration to go along with them.
Nice. That's super cool. Yeah, I know EHP had mentioned, I remember a while back, he said collabing with you and those characters really connecting with him. So it was interesting you bring that up for sure. I guess I'm just curious, did you sort of get something different out of writing those characters with someone else that you maybe didn't get when you're just writing them yourself? Did you sort of see them in a different light, perhaps?
Well, definitely, because I basically had written 2 stories with them, and that was it. So, like, they weren't as fleshed out as they could have been. So, like, sitting down and collabing with someone really makes you think, okay, how can I develop these characters in a way that so they can like properly interact with these other characters. Like, for example, one of his characters, like her name is Casey. She's on the soccer team. So because of that, that was her way of knowing Jenna because they're both on the soccer team together. But it's like kind of like you have to come up with a reason for why characters have the relationship they do. Like Casey looks up to Jenna because she's like the upperclassman who's really good at soccer. So like you have to really when I'm collabing, I have to really like it really made me think of like how I could use my characters in a better way. If that makes sense.
That makes sense, and that's some really cool insights and sort of the values of collaborating with another writer, which I think is super cool. So we've tackled a lot about your writing and your art, and be able to dive into your OCs and really a sort of process, I guess, of you writing for many years now. So I'm curious, do you have any advice for writers and artists in the community, maybe those just starting out, looking to maybe make their first stories and characters? Any advice for them?
Advice. I would say read your favorite writers in the community and see what works for them and then try and emulate that in your own way. You don't have to write, if they're a fandom writer, you don't have to write the exact same characters, but you can if you want. Or you can you can look at your favorite story and then trying to not copy it, but like take that story and be like, okay, how would I have written this in a different way that like stands out on its own.
That's good. That's really good advice for sure. So I'd like to open it up to you. Is there anything we didn't touch on? Obviously, you have a lot of work, and I think we covered a lot in terms of your writing and art. But is there any stories or any work in particular we didn't touch on that you think people should know about? Or more generally, is there any sort of questions you wanted to throw out to the community, or just things you think they should think about, concerns you potentially have about sort of things that go on you think people should be thinking about?
I know for me, the main concern is just like the community feels a lot like it feels a lot different than when I first joined. Like especially, well, I feel like it's especially just because of how the year has been, but like the rate of stories has dropped off a lot. It's like one of the main reasons why I've gotten back into. It's like one of the reasons why I got back into writing. I was like, okay, I joined this community to give back to the community, and like, it's like oh, there's hard times now, so it's time. It's like I start writing again.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess for me, it's like I don't have any like concrete questions to ask the community. I guess it's more just like, hey, okay, I understand why people aren't writing as much as they used to, and yeah, that's basically it.
That's good. What's really cool to me is hearing that sort of passion that drove you at the beginning to write, sort of came back recently with a fury, which is super exciting. It sounds like we have a lot of really cool stuff to look forward to, from the potential interactive story to just more Speed Queen, which is really cool. And so I know I personally can't wait for a lot of that, and I'm sure your fans can't either. So I want to thank you, Sorry, for taking the time to chat, to really dive into your work and art. I feel like this was a really cool exploration of a lot of the work you do, and I really can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you.
Awesome. And thanks so much for joining me today. So great to chat with you. And thanks, everybody, for listening. I hope you take care and stay safe in what's become a certainly crazy world, as Sorry was sort of alluding to. And I hope you take care. Bye for now, everybody, and thanks for listening.
Thanks again.